The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha. Homage to the Dharma. Homage to the Sangha. I would like to thank Reverend Master Mayon and all the Abbey monks for the opportunity to share this wonderful teaching of the Surangama. Thank you all for coming. I apologize for not being an expert in this sutra. There are two reasons for giving teachings. One, you might have something to say, and the other is that you might have something to learn. And in this case, I'm the second one. The reading of and studying of this scripture and doing of this ceremony is one with real profound teaching, and every time I encounter it, I find something new and something important in ways of deepening my own practice. I apologize for also not being able to cover all the material in the sutra. And I'm hoping that people will read the entire text. I want to thank the Dharma Realm Buddhist University and the Buddhist Text Translation Society for the wonderful translation, and also for the kind offering of books for this retreat. It is not important that you understand everything that you read or hear in the Surangama Sutra. Some of it is difficult to understand. Just let it sink in. Take in what you can use to deepen your training, and let the rest of it just sit there until it becomes relevant. The events that gave rise to this sutra was the fact that the Buddha was ending a rains retreat and had accepted an invitation for a meal of the local king, Prasanajit. And during the meal, he realized that something was up with his cousin and chief attendant, Ananda. Ananda had accepted a private invitation to go for a meal, and on his way back, the next day, he was out with his alms bowl, and he was going through a rather seedy part of town, and was invited into a house of prostitution, unbeknownst to himself. And there was a beautiful young lady who was very entranced by Ananda, who was a very handsome young man. And she started to do this chant that she had been taught to seduce young men. And Ananda was getting very interested. And the Buddha realized that something was up here, and so he went back to the monastery, and he taught the Bodhisattva of wisdom, Manjusri, the Surangama litany, which we just recited. It's sometimes called the Surangama mantra. And he told Manjusri to go to where Ananda and the young lady were and recite the Surangama litany. That would break the spell, and then bring them both, or invite them both, back to the monastery. By the time the sutra starts, the young lady has become ordained as a bhikkhuni. And Ananda is, of course, very contrite. And so Ananda asked the Buddha for teaching on how to avoid the difficulties that he just got himself into. Ananda had this phenomenal intellectual mind. He was able to memorize and recall from memorization everything the Buddha taught. And it's because of Ananda that we have Buddha Sutras today. On the other hand, it was his greatest weakness, because he was so involved in his intellectual and thinking mind that he didn't think he had to actually train his mind. And so this is why he got himself into trouble here. So the first part of the sutra is the Buddha asking Ananda, just where is your mind? And Ananda comes up with 6 different possibilities, which shows the creativity of his intellectual brain. The Buddha is actually talking about where is the Buddha mind, and Ananda is thinking, where is my own mind? And so the major teaching in the first part of this sutra is that there is a very significant difference between the Buddha mind, the one with the capital M, and the mind that comes up with our thoughts and ideas, opinions, our likes and our dislikes, our emotions. And so the Buddha is basically trying to get Ananda to look at just what is his mind. And what he asks Ananda some really skillful questioning and skillful responses to Ananda's answers, but I'm not going to go into all of those. And especially you don't have to understand all the logic involved in how the Buddha answers Ananda's answers here. But he is attempting to show Ananda and the Great Assembly how to identify the true mind of the Buddha and distinguish it from the thought processes of our brains that are conditioned by involvement with the senses. The Buddha asks Ananda what caused him to leave home and become a monk. Ananda answers that he was dazzled by the 32 marks of the Buddha. The Buddha then questioned him as to where the mind and eyes are that saw the Buddha and was dazzled by it. Might have been just as helpful to ask, what are the mind and eyes, instead of where? A major theme of this sutra is that someone who does not know where his mind and eyes are will not be able to overcome the stress of engagement with perceived objects. Beings who are not successful in their religious practice fail to understand the 2 fundamentals. The first is that there is a mind that's dependent upon perceived objects. This is the karmically conditioned mind, subject to the chain of dependent origination. I'm going to very briefly cover that. The chain of dependent origination starts with the fact that there is ignorance. And the primary and fundamental ignorance that's being talked about here is the illusion of a self. And when we act on that ignorance, we create a habit energy. And that's what goes on after death. This habit energy of thinking that there is actually a self. And acting from that delusion. And because what that habit energy does is it looks for another body and mind after death. It seeks out its own rebirth. And when it gets the new body and mind, it has the 6 senses. In contact with the senses, creates perception. And again, when that perception is seen through the eyes of delusion, of a self, and a thinking that there's a self and other, and we get attached to our likes and our dislikes and cling to this illusion, that creates the habit energy for future births. Consequently, growth, old age, disease, and death, and the carrying on of the ignorance. Until someone realizes that there is a fully awakened, pure awareness, the Buddha mind, the enlightened mind, it would be helpful to think of this mind with a capital M. From Master Ji, you might have phrased it as awareness of the purity. This pure awareness is what doesn't die and isn't born. it combines with that habit energy of karma to seek out future births. But this pure awareness is inseparable from everything. But it doesn't have a location. I'm going to read the Buddha's description. Ananda, because you now wish to know about the path of calming the mind and wish to be subject to birth and death no longer, I will question you again. Then the Buddha raised his golden-hued arm and bent his 5 fingers, each of them marked with lines in the shape of a wheel. And he asked Ananda, "Did you see something?" Ananda said, "I did." The Buddha said, "What did you see?" Ananda said, "I saw the Buddha raise his arms and bend his fingers into a fist and send forth light, dazzling my mind and eyes." The Buddha said, "When you saw my fist emit light, what did you see it with?" Ananda said, "All of us in the Great Assembly saw it with our eyes." And the Buddha said to Ananda, "You have answered that the Buddha bent his fingers into a fist that sent forth light, dazzling your mind and eyes. Your eyes can see my fist, but what do you take to be your mind that was dazzled by it?" This is a very important point because the intellectual and brain-type mind is the one that gets dazzled and likes or dislikes things. And this is the mind that has to be distinguished from this pure awareness. Ananda said, the Buddha has just now been asking me about my mind's location. And my mind is what I have been using to determine where it might be. My mind is that which has the capacity of making such determinations. And the Buddha exclaimed, "Ananda, that is not your mind." Startled, Ananda stood up, placed his palms together, and said to the Buddha, "Well, if it's not my mind, what is it?" And the Buddha said to Ananda, "It is merely your mental processes that assign false and illusory attributes to the world of perceived objects. These processes delude you about your true nature and have caused you since time without beginning and in your present life to mistake the burglar for your own child, to lose touch with your own original everlasting mind, and thus you are bound to the cycle of death and rebirth." Ananda said to the Buddha, "World-honored one, I'm the Buddha's favorite cousin. It's been my mind that loved the Buddha and led me to enter the monastic life. That mind of mine has been responsible not only for my serving the Buddha, but also for my serving all Buddhas and all good and wise teachers throughout as many lands as there are sand grains in the river Ganges. It has always been that mind that has marshaled great courage to practice every difficult aspect of the Dharma. If I were to slander the Dharma and forsake forever my good roots in it, that mind of mine would be the cause of even that. If this activity of comprehending is not my mind, then I have no mind, and I am the same as a clod of earth or a piece of wood, because nothing exists apart from my mind's awareness and its knowledge. Why does the Buddha say that this is not my mind? Now I am genuinely alarmed and frightened. Neither I nor anyone else here in this great assembly is free from doubt." He takes some liberties here by assuming that everybody else in the assembly is quite in his same state. It may not be the case. "I only hope that the thus come one, the Buddha, with great compassion for us, will instruct all those among us who are not yet awake." Then Ananda and the others in the great assembly, and then to Ananda and the others in the great assembly, the world-honored one gave instruction in gaining patience with the state of mind in which no mental objects arise. This is the Buddha mind. From the lion's seat, he reached out and circled his hand on the crown of Ananda's head, saying to him, "The Buddha has often explained that all phenomena that come into being are nothing more than the manifestations of the mind. All things that are subject to the principle of cause and effect, from the largest world to the smallest mote of dust, come into being because of the mind. If we examine the fundamental nature of each thing in the world, Ananda, down to even the smallest whiffs of grass, we will see that all have reality. Even space has a name and attributes. Given that, how could the clear, wondrous, pure mind, the mind that truly understands and is the basic nature of all mental state, itself lack reality? But if, as you insist, that which makes distinctions and is aware of them, which knows and understands them, is indeed the mind, then that mind would necessarily have its own essential nature, independent of its involvement with objects, with visible objects, sounds, odors, flavors, and objects of touch. Yet now, as you listen to my Dharma, it is due to the sounds that you can distinguish my meaning. Even if you were to withdraw into a state of quietude, in which all seeing, hearing, awareness of taste, and tactile awarenesses cease, you would still be making distinctions among the shadowy aspects of cognition in your mind. I am not demanding that you just accept that this distinction-making capacity is not the mind, but examine your mind in minute detail to determine if a distinction-making capacity exists independent of its perceived objects of awareness. That would truly be your mind. If, on the other hand, your distinction-making capacity does not have an essential nature apart from its perceived objects, then it too would be a perceived object, a shadowy mental object. Perceived objects are not permanent. And when that mind ceased to exist, such that it had no more reality than a turtle with fur or a hare with horns, then your Dharma body would cease to exist along with it. Then who would be left to practice and perfect patience with a state of mind in which no mental objects arise? At that point, Ananda and the others in the great assembly were utterly dumbfounded. They had nothing to say. The Buddha said to Ananda, "The reason why so many practitioners in the world do not succeed in putting an end to outflows and becoming arhats, though they may have passed through all 9 of the successive stages of samadhi, is that they are attached to distorted mental processes that come into being and then cease to be. And they mistake these processes for what is real. That is why, even though you have become quite learned, you have not become a sage." When Ananda had heard that, he again wept sorrowfully. He then bowed to the ground, knelt on both knees, placed his palms together and said to the Buddha, "Ever since I followed the Buddha and resolved to enter the monastic life, I have relied on the Buddha's awe-inspiring spirit. I have often thought, there is no reason for me to toil at spiritual practice, because I just expected that the thus come one would graciously transfer some of his samadhi to me. I never realized that in fact he simply could not stand in for me in body or in mind. Thus I abandoned my original resolve, and though my body has indeed entered the monastic life, my mind has not entered the path. I am like the poor son that ran away from his father." This is a story from the Lotus Scripture. "Today I realize, though I am learned, I might as well not have learned anything if I do not practice, just as someone who only talks of food never gets full." World-honored one, we are all bound by 2 obstructions, and as a consequence, we are unaware of the mind that is everlasting and still. I only hope that the thus come one will take pity on all of us who are destitute and homeless. will disclose the wondrous mind that truly understands and open our eyes to the path. These two obstructions are the obstruction of affliction, which rises from attachment to self, and the obstruction of knowledge, which rises from attachment to phenomena, which leads to arrogance. Then the Buddha poured forth resplendent light from the symbol of purity, the manji on his chest. The brilliant light, radiant with hundreds of thousands of colors, shone all through the 10 directions simultaneously to illuminate Buddha lands, as many as motes of dust, and it showed upon the crowns of the head of the Buddhas in every one of those radiant Buddha lands. Then the light returned to shine upon the great assembly, upon Ananda and all the others. Thereupon the Buddha said to Ananda, "I now will raise for all of you a great Dharma banner, so that all beings in all 10 directions can gain access to what is wondrous, subtle, and hidden, the pure and luminous mind that understands, so that they can open their clear-seeing eyes." Unfortunately, reading this scripture will not completely allow one to know the enlightened mind, as it cannot be adequately explained in words. It must be known through practice. So the meditation and the recitation of the Surangama litany are an essential aids in understanding what is being pointed to here. The Buddha is telling us that it is due to misperceptions because of involvement with the senses that the illusion of self arises. We have the ability to change our perception. When Reverend Master Jisho was in Japan, she was subject to all sorts of hostility, to physical beatings, to prejudice, to all sorts of irrational behavior. She could have sat there and thought of herself as a victim of this ridiculous situation. But she decided instead to take everything that was happening as happening for her good. This was a major shift in perception. That she chose to see things in a different way. If we only see things through the filter of the senses, then we judge everything through a filter of like and a dislike. This distorts the pure awareness of the Buddha mind. You don't have to like things, you don't have to dislike things, you just have to be aware. Mindfulness. The Buddha talks of meditation as the state of mind in which no mental objects arise. This is just another way of saying just sitting with no deliberate thought. It says it from the point of view of not generating thoughts. This does not mean that you need to suppress or repress thoughts. It means that you can focus on the silence or the stillness and let any thought go that arises in the stillness. The Eternal awaits in the silence, offering infinite loving kindness and peace. Whenever we are willing to let go of the karmically conditioned illusions of self and our involvement with the outflows of the senses. It is a subtle little shift and fine-tuning of perception that allows us simply to be still and to develop patience with that stillness. To go directly into that stillness. Reverend Leon gave a lovely talk this morning about basically how to do this very thing. And he notes that the word prajna, or wisdom, means before knowledge. Dogen talks about the harmonization of body and mind as to turn the stream of compassion within and give up both knowledge and its recognition. This is the place at which we can find true refuge in the stillness. Homage to all the Buddhas in all worlds. Homage to all the Bodhisattvas in all worlds. Homage to the scripture of great wisdom.